of our airport for 30 years. They were bringing no money to the table. All of the money to build the airport was coming from whom? Was coming from the government. That's where the money was coming from. So the tax money that was being earned off of the passengers coming in, which we could have been collecting ourselves. We should have been collecting ourselves, Mr. Speaker. So in fact, if the former government, when they came in, had left the tax in place, that we had left the $35. In fact, by the time they were ready to build the airport, which was certainly the end of their term because they took their time, they would have collected over $200 million. And if the airport terminal was going to cost $400 million, it means that they would have already had half of the money. They would have only had to borrow $200 million. But you see, because of politics, and that's the difficulty, is when you have a leader or a group of leaders that make statements in opposition, when they get in and they find that the facts are different, they don't have the strength, Mr. Speaker, to admit they were wrong. And what did they do? Because they made a campaign promise they were going to take off the tax, they took off the tax. And so the fact that at the end of 5 years, they could not start the airport, Mr. Speaker, they only have one person to blame: themselves. Nobody else. And so what's the difference is when we came in, we met with IFC, and when they explained to us, and we understood clearly that the third-party person was bringing no money to the table, Mr. Speaker, and they were going to be using only the state's monies that are being gained by the tax, we asked ourselves, why would we do that? And when we met with the Taiwanese became very interested in lending us a development loan. So what is that loan, Mr. Speaker? They've lent us $100 million US for 20 years. The first 5 years is a moratorium. So what it means is we don't pay any principal payments for the first 5 years. And all we pay for the first 5 years is the interest, and the interest is 1.5% plus LIBOR. I believe today that the LIBOR rate's about 0.5 or 0.6%. So you're talking about an interest rate of about 2.1%. Versus when you go through the deal that was being done by the former government, these are the little details that they seem to have brushed over. That the developer was going to lend them the money to do the development at 6.5%, if I'm not mistaken. And it was for 15 years. So, Mr. Speaker, I'm happy to show you the agreement. Okay? So that is what the problem is. So when you look at the comparison to the two deals, the only reason why they were going that direction is because it was expressed to them that by putting it into an SPV, it would not be counted as part of the government's debt. That was the big deal. And our government said, we're going to argue the merits of that, because another thing that they continuously say, Mr. Speaker, on this issue, I don't know if it's misleading or if it's just not understanding, that this is not a debt to the state. This is a debt to SLASPA. Government guaranteed the debt to SLASPA. But SLASPA is the one taking the loan. Government agreed to assign the $35 to SLASPA, and they gave them a guarantee for the debt. But it's SLASPA's debt. And none of the payments that are being made towards the airport are coming from the recurrent revenue, or better known as the consolidated fund. Not one cent. The money that's being used to pay the loan of the airport is coming from the $35, which is in a lockbox under the control of SLASPA, and now also under the control of the bank in New York that's been assigned by Exim Bank. Those are the two people. That's where the money comes from. And how do we know the model works? Because in less than 2 years or 3 years that we've put the money, the tax on, I think it's just 2 years, we've accumulated over $80 million. And it means that if in fact there is no tourism arrivals for the next 2 years, 0 tourism arrivals for the next 2 years, they can still finance the loan. And that's why Exim Bank was able to give us the loan that they gave us, because that is what the lockbox is for. The lockbox is to assure that the loan is being paid. So, and I'm sure that members on the other side, when they come out publicly and say that the government should break the lockbox, know exactly what they're talking about. Because they know that if in fact we broke the lockbox, in essence what we would have done, Mr. Speaker, we would have been in breach of the loan agreement. And if we're in breach of the loan agreement, the $100 million would have disappeared and the airport would have come to a halt. So when members on the other side, Mr. Speaker, pretend to be talking about the interest of the people, sometimes, most of the time, I have to really question how genuine that is. But I'm hoping, Mr. Speaker, after that explanation, because we've had this discussion a multitude of times, we've actually had the agreements that were presented even by the member of the opposite side, and that we can put this to rest. That in fact, the deal that you all were doing, Mr. Speaker, the members on the opposite side were doing, right, was not in the best interest of the state, because it would have been $65 committed. So what's the difference is the $35, the $20, the $30 that we're saving. That money is going where? That money has been going into a sinking fund and to support our tourism marketing. That's where it's been going. That's money that we've gained. You want to stand up?
I would not like to disturb the Prime Minister, but the Prime Minister should give all the facts on the agreements that he speaks to. There are a few cogent points that he left out. Number one, there is a share of the gross revenues in that agreement. Every cent that is collected on the airport, the SLASPA will have got a share of the gross revenues before tax, gross, before expenses, number one. Number two, there has been no PPP partner had been chosen. What the Prime Minister is talking about is a draft agreement where there were 3 interested parties. One of them had pulled out, and there were 2 more, and the discussion were being held with them. The concessionary agreement that he's speaking of, it has a few points that he's left out. Probably he may have forgotten. Number one, share of gross revenues. Number two, there will be no tax incentives for the developer, so there will be no waiver of any duties. Number three, there was a share of profits. Every year, the government will have had a director on the board of the airport company, and there would have been a share of profits between the government and the director. And the fourth point is that the SLASPA debt is a contingent liability on the government of St. Lucia. So it is not correct, it is not a fact to say that because the debt was taken by SLASPA, the government did not have any share. The debt is in the country's debt profile, and the contingent liability of SLASPA, WASCO, all of these are in the debt profile. I just thought I'd make it.
Continue.
Under the PPP, as far as I know and as far as I've read, it is not on the
Honorable member, between the two of you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'm so happy that the member stood on a point of order. So exactly, the fact is that they created this formula to share profits, and it was not before, it was after, and after the expenses, and we brought that up, Mr. Speaker, at the meeting. I said, I know exactly how this goes. The developer will find all kinds of things to invest in, and there will never be a profit. No, it wasn't. No, it wasn't. It wasn't a gross revenue. There was
Continue, Honorable Prime Minister.
There was a fee on the gross revenue, but the profit sharing was on the profit. Okay? And so at the end of the day, Mr. Speaker, it's a bad deal. It's a bad deal. Why would you do that? And the fact is that the World Bank and the IMF have come back out and said whether you had it in a SPV or not, it was still going to be considered a contingent liability because of the investment asset you were going into, which was a critical asset for the state. So this wasn't like a factory that if you allow the factory to shut down, the fact is if in fact the investor went bad, the government would have to take over the airport because it's a critical asset. So there was no savings in that regard. So it was a condition. So the fact is that, Mr. Speaker, it was a bad deal. And I think that the fact is that we're only giving $35. The other part of the deal is that once we've paid off the loan, then the lockbox goes away and all the money starts coming back to us. And if and hopefully when we get back on pace, we believe that we can pay off the $100 million in a short time. In terms of the $75 million that we're borrowing from the local banks, Mr. Speaker, again, they've given us the same terms as the Taiwanese, and the intention is the money that we're collecting off of the $35 in the first 5 years, less the interest payments, that the intention is to try to pay down on the $75 million as much as possible. So we get $15 million a year. If you take $12 million times 5 is $60 million. We can pay back $60 million of the principal of that loan. So it means that if we're very diligent, we can make sure that we've paid back the loan within 15 years. And that means that the full $35 now comes back into the state to continue to do other developments. We've subsequently gotten a loan of $50 million from the World Bank on an extremely concessional basis, over 40-year money at like 0.5% or 0.75%, if I'm not mistaken. And that is to do the resurfacing of the runway, possibly a taxiway, and to redo all of the navigational equipment at the airport. That's the cost of the airport. The other thing that's being presented and bannered around is that we have deliberately moved the airport to a different location. The fact is that the airport was designed to go where the car park is. That's where the new terminal was supposed to go. And once the new terminal was built, they were going to demolish the existing building. And then when we started entering into discussions with the possibility of doing a home port facility with the cruise ships, well, we said, look, and given the congestion at the airport, to be building a new airport behind it, we looked at going laterally at the bottom of the Kakabeth. So to the right of the bottom of the Kakabeth. And that now gave us the opportunity of building a new airport terminal, isolating it away from the existing terminal, and then when it was completed, was to convert the old terminal now into a charter terminal. And so when the cruise ship passengers would be coming in, they would actually be going and using that facility. And whatever spillover demand that we have on the main terminal, we would have had the secondary terminal to have backed us up in that regard. So we felt that for the next 15 years was a much better plan than where we're going. And since then, we've now been in negotiations with the US government, which was a benefit of being in the Lima Group, to get a pre-clearance facility. And a pre-clearance facility means that St. Lucians and tourists who are here, when they check into the airport, like they do in Toronto, like they do in Bermuda and Nassau, you check into US and Customs Immigration here in St. Lucia. So it means that when you arrive into the US, you arrive as a domestic flight. So it means you don't have to go through Customs Immigration in Miami. You don't have to go and pick up your bags. You literally arrive into the departure terminal itself, and as if you're flying domestically within the US. These are the things that we've done, Mr. Speaker. And we believe that HIA is going to be a world-class airport terminal, extremely well designed, well thought out, and more importantly, we've increased the capacity of St. Lucia by threefold. So yes, So it takes a government that has ambition, a government that does believe in growth, and growth that can fund development, that has the foresight to be able to go and make this happen. Because the current airport is already bursting at the seams. Okay? Okay, EU. You know, Mr. Speaker, it's the conflicting stories that come out. On one hand, we hear members on the opposite side say that COVID showed that we could have moved into OK EU earlier. But then we heard today from member from Castries South that not all is well at OKU and that there's problems. If I'm not mistaken, when we came to this house and we indicated that we were going to have to move into OKEU, we said we're moving in prematurely. We said that the air conditioning system is giving problems. They're in the process of changing out one of the machines, but there are 3 more that I believe that they have to change out. The ventilators are giving problems. The drainage was giving problems. Those are the physical things, Mr. Speaker, and we have to spend over $28 million to make those repairs. And that $28 million came at the worst time, because we've also got all of the other COVID expenses, and we're, for the last 2.5 months, attempting to negotiate revenue to make up for the significant shortfall there's been in tax revenue. And it's been a problem. But here's how far back we can go to show the problems at OKU. When we came to this house and we were in opposition and we debated the Millennium Heights bill, I think many of us here remember that. I remember I was sitting up in the corner in those days, being ridiculed that I would never be in the house at every moment. And what the bill did is it took Victoria Hospital and made Victoria Hospital part of Millennium Heights. And I think what the intention was for the individuals at Victoria Hospital were supposed to be transferred to OKEU. And we came in, we made that amendment in terms of how the secondment process would work. But what happened is that when they passed that bill, what should have happened immediately is that the Millennium Heights board, like the St. Jude's board, should have been appointed. So you now have a quandary, a quagmire, in that you have the workers at Victoria Hospital, who by now legislation were no longer working for the government. They were now looking for the Millennium Heights. And that transition never took place. And one of the problems that we have confronted, Mr. Speaker, is in moving into OKEU, the Millennium Heights board was not put in place. The job descriptions and organizational charts of the Millennium Heights has not been formalized. And therefore, the individuals who are currently at OKEU have never been given contracts to be at the Millennium Heights. So you have staff members who are still government service persons, who should not be government service persons, who believe they're still reporting to the permanent secretary in health, and have not recognized and do not need to recognize legally the board. And these are some of the problems that we were trying to prevent, and that's why the delay in being able to move. It had a tremendous amount of problems and still has problems. And so we have signed a consultancy to bring a group in to help us put together an organizational structure and what we call SOP, Standard Operating Procedures. Is this the first time that this has happened in St. Lucia, Mr. Speaker? The answer is no. In the early 2000s, Mercy Hospital came in and did exactly the same thing for St. Jude's. And that's why you can go down to St. Jude's today, and even if they're operating in a stadium, the operating procedures work much better than what they did at Victoria. That's no fault of the workers and the people and the nurses and the doctors who are at Victoria. That's just a bad management structure. So, Mr. Speaker, we will get those things resolved. I also want to put all fears aside that we, despite of COVID, despite of all the other priorities we have signed the contract with the World Bank, and we are proceeding to implement the healthcare insurance. Because the healthcare insurance is critical to solve 2 problems, Mr. Speaker. One is to make sure that every single person in this country has access to healthcare, because currently they don't. We keep pretending that we have universal health care. We don't have universal health care. And it's heartbreaking to go and see those persons. And so I want to know the compassion of the former government, in for 15 years, and speaking to the former Minister of Health in your administration. From early, the offer was on the table to do health care insurance. It never happened. So where was the priority? Where was the empathy? Where was the compassion to make that happen, Mr. Speaker? And this is what I'm saying to Mr. Speaker. It's always when it's convenient. That's why, you know what, I call this the government, they manage themselves using a rearview mirror. Everything is by hindsight. Nothing is by moving forward. So we are committed to health care insurance, and health care insurance is both for the more vulnerable persons in our society, but also to pay for the operations to have the hospital run properly. Because that was not taking place at Victoria. Is that people were using medicines and there was no record of it. And there was no monies to replace it. All they were getting is a quarterly subvention, not based on actually what was happening and the cost operations at entity. The next one I want to bring up, Mr. Speaker, is the wind farm, because that came up. And why is it that we did not do the wind farm when we came in? We did not do the wind farm, and I remember the debate I hope members remember that, that the gentleman, Mr. Wolf, wanted us to acquire the land where the wind farm was going to go. And his argument, if I'm not mistaken, was the land had no value. So we said to him, but it does have value, because if there's value in putting a wind farm there, it has value. And we said, government is not going to be in the process of taking away land for persons on a commercial deal. If in fact this makes sense, go and find who the owners are and do a royalty agreement with them. Get their support. And Mr. Wolf refused to go in that direction. He was insisting that government's contribution to this ought to be, Mr. Speaker, that we acquire the land. And we were adamant. He indicated that he couldn't find the persons. I believe it was the Attorney General who said that he knew the family members and he would help put them together. And then sadly, Mr. Wolf died. But I wanted everyone to know that we are pursuing that project, and we hopefully can find somebody who's actually willing to lease the land and pay and compensate the persons who own the land, rather than depending on the state to do that. The LED lights for the street lights, Mr. Speaker. Again, when we came in, the member from the Leader of Opposition, 100% right, came in and there was pretty much a deal that was done for it to be funded by CDB. And I had hard meetings with CDB, because there were two projects in particular. The Minister of Agriculture is here and who is in charge of WASCO. We refused to sign the agreement with CDB on the desilting of the dam, because they wanted us to provide a government guarantee. And we said, why would we provide a government guarantee? There's a revenue stream. There's a tax that's being collected. We'd be happy to assign that money to you, but we do not believe that government should take up valuable fiscal space in doing something where there's a revenue stream. And similarly with the LED lights. Why would government go and borrow $15 million to do lights when there are in fact private sector partners that are willing to come in, put that capital up, pay it back by on the savings of the light of the saving of the light cost. And luckily we did that, because it included, in addition to now putting the LED lights, I believe we're in negotiations with them to put in the cameras. I think it's 1,800 cameras that we're going to be putting in. So, Mr. Speaker, we're going to get all of that without having to put any cash out. We just have to continue paying our bills in order to be able to pay over a period of time. But the beauty of that is exactly what members on the opposite side said, that COVID now, even more so, is telling you you need to do PPPs. Find ways in which you can use government revenue streams in order to get the other people to put up the capital money. Okay. So, in terms of another one that came up, again, was this issue, and I get confused, Mr. Speaker, whether the members on the opposite side, I'm going to certainly give them the benefit of the doubt, Mr. Speaker. The issue of Coconut Bay paying severance and laying off the 400 people. But the way I've been hearing presented on the other side, like this is a calamity. And this is a reflection of the times. Well, if it took the Coconut Bay paying the severance to its workers for you to understand that there is a crisis out there, I'm really sorry. but every single hotel has laid off its staff. In fact, we came to the House to amend the Labor Act in order to allow persons to keep people employed but not on the payroll for another 3 months. So what's the issue with Coconut Bay? Coconut Bay and the owners decided that given where the staff were, that they felt very sorry for them. And what they wanted to do was to give them more money. And the quickest way for them to give them more money was to sever them. So it means that everybody who'd been working there for years actually got their severance paid, and they got cash out. Now, you really believe when Coconut Bay reopens, they're going to be hiring different people? After they've trained all of those people? No. That's what they did. And you know what's so sad, Mr. Speaker? There are examples of Bell Fashions and Majestic and even Castries Apparel. I believe members on the opposite side would know Castries Apparel. Companies that came here and in the middle of the night absconded and did not pay the severance pay. And here's a company in this difficult time. Well, difficult time, Mr. Speaker, and paid the severance for their workers. So I want to applaud Coconut Bay for what they have done. It's not a requirement that we're putting on the other hoteliers, because it is a huge undertaking to have paid the severance for those workers. Redundancy. The other one that came up and continues to come up is this 4-lane highway, and there was money there. I remember it was from the Kuwaiti funds, if I'm not mistaken, to do it. And what we said was, and we came out very early in one of our policy pronouncements, even in this House, is that the amount of money that we would have had to spend on doing that, and we still didn't have enough money to complete it, would not solve the problem. And then when we looked at the North-South Highway, and the fact that the government had put the DFID money, the 30 million pounds, into it, and as was being indicated here, the cost of the highway was in excess of $300 million, just to do the part from, not from Shock, from Darren Sammy Stadium to Dennery. That's what the CDB report says. In fact, the CDB report says it's $600 million to do it all the way down to View Fort. I'm just taking US. I'm just taking that one portion. No. I said when we realized that the cost of doing the Groselet to Castries, the amount of money that we would have had to spend, we did not believe that that money was going to be well spent. We then looked at the North-South Highway, particularly the part from the Darren Sammy Stadium to Dennery, as an alternate bypass. We knew that the government had assigned the 30 million pounds to that project from DFID, and that when we got the feasibility study from CDB, we weren't going to get the extra money. So what we decided to do was something that they had done or had planned to do, if you're not mistaken. We used to call it the Emma Hippolyte budget. I think it was 2014, where they were going to do all the back roads. And that was a good idea. And so what we decided to do was to keep the back road component, and that is a big part of what's taking place right now in Castries North, Castries Central, and Castries East. And we're spending a lot of money. Yeah, your Bocage, everybody, a whole bunch of roads that are being done over there. So, Mr. Speaker. We have signed an MOU with the Canadian government, with a company called Dexter, if I'm not mistaken. They're currently doing the runway in Barbados. They're a huge road developer in Canada, to look at the feasibility and see how we can possibly find the funding. We've agreed in principle that we're prepared some of the remaining monies that we have from the airport tax to assign it to that particular project. So hopefully within the upcoming months that we'll have some more information on that particular project. The other issue that came up, Mr. Speaker, is National Trust. Look, I think National Trust plays a very important role in the development of St. Lucia. And I certainly don't have any issues with National Trust. I have had several meetings with the National Trust. I do have concerns in terms of how they manage their resources. I did have concerns. I made those concerns known publicly in terms of their priorities and the development of sites, because I think there's a clear conflict in being conservationists and developers of sites. But clearly, I think you can say the National Trust is a decent conservation advocacy group, but they are horrible at managing their assets. They just have not been able to develop them and create any kind of appropriate revenue streams. So we had the confrontation with regards to the dolphins. Again, I'm still perplexed. Came in, the former government had approved 2 dolphin sites, Mr. Speaker. One in Anjabet and one in Rodney Bay. In fact, they had acquired land in Anjabet and had given incentives to the developer up north. When we were asked to do something at Pigeon Island, we sent it to the National Trust. And the National Trust went on a charade. But why am I surprised? Look who's on the National Trust. What's Calix George Jr.'s role? What's Alison Gajada's role? What's Peter Foster's role? What's Renee's role? What's Richard Frederick's role? Who are these people on the trust? Yes, he's on the trust. He was at the last meeting. I don't know, I'm asking. I'm just saying to you, when I went to the meeting, at the trust meeting, that's who was there. And now has become one of the greatest advocates of the trust. So, no, I'm not mentioning names. I'm deliberately mentioning names. You have Jimmy Fletcher. So what I'm saying to you is, how these same individuals who sat, some of them in cabinet, who were close to the government, who knew about the Dolphin Park, all of a sudden now take a completely opposite position. But the most shameful one right now is the one that's taking place at Cabot. And I'm amazed that members on the other side have not stood up, because when they were in government, they're the ones who supported the Raffles project. The Raffles project had started. Jack Nicholas was down here. Golf course was being cut. Properties had been sold. It's the exact same land and it's the exact same development. Exactly the same. It is exactly the same land. There's no, absolutely. It's exactly the same land. Nothing is different. Nothing is different. They bought it in receivership, so how could it be any different? If they bought it in receivership and they bought the plans, they bought everything. Okay? And so the EIA that was already done, that was already approved. And then now, you know, Mr. Speaker, they come and they talk about archaeological society. I'm going to get to that. I'm going to get to that. Archaeological dig. So in 2009, Mr. Speaker, under our government, under the Stephenson King, Gaspar Chalmine was your Minister of Culture and invited an American group to come down to
Honorable members,
to do an archaeological dig, Mr. Speaker. And they found some bones. And it was properly documented by 2010, 2011. The caring government of the Labour Party came into office.
honorable members,
The ones that are concerned about patrimony and heritage, tell you all these wonderful things, right? And what did they do? They leased the land where the bones were to a person who put a shop on it, and exactly where the bones are is being used as a car park. And pictures now being sent out as if this is on the same lands at Cabot. But this is the problem, Mr. Speaker. These things are difficult enough, and again, what you want to do is to compromise the private sector coming in. But I guess you may think that he's a leech. Here's a gentleman who has been successful all around the world, that his golf courses are ranked in the top 50, 3 of them, coming in these hard times to put this development together, a private sector development, not even government land, to put this together. But no, the opposition won't even stand up and defend him. They're happy for people to be making the noise and to prevent it from happening. And then what? Bring up like there's something that has been done, perpetuated, that illegal, immoral. NIC invests pensioners' money in St. Lucia, in government buildings, in land, and in investments overseas. In fact, he knows there's a certain amount of money there, cannot invest in St. Lucia. They invest in bonds in the region, they invest in bonds in the US, they invest in bonds in Europe. And so what would they do? They choose to invest 10 million US dollars in it's not just a golf course, it's a hotel and real estate development to put St. Lucia on the map when it comes to golf. That's what they were doing, investing in the people of St. Lucia. And then guess what? We're making it out to be that they've done something wrong. Guess what they did? They paid for the land, they have paid for all their developments, and they mortgaged the land. So NIC has 400 acres of land that today is valued at 30 million US dollars. And after the golf course is built, but take it yourself. Oh, well, that's, Mr. Speaker, the member says, who believes me? The fact is, you can take 400 acres. He knows how much land cost at Cap Estate. Okay? He can have Cap Estate. Right? And that's what the
Mr. Speaker, on a point of order, can I just ask the Prime Minister to make available to us the documents that show the figures that he's quoting? He's the Prime Minister. He's in Parliament. He's making statements. And, Mr. Speaker, the rules of the House are very clear. When ministers are citing official documents and figures and sources, they should make it a document of the House. I am not a minister. I'm not a minister.
Honorable Member Hansley.
Serious.
Honorable Member, he's standing on the point of order.
So can you ask the Prime Minister to make available to us the documents so when he says it, I can believe him now?
Mr. Speaker, you know, these are the levels of disingenuousness that takes place. If the member just simply goes out and gets a land valuation for what land is being sold at Cap Estate, discount it because it's 400 acres of land, knowing that you're going to put a golf course on it, knowing that you're going to put a hotel on it, and you're going to have all these wonderful sites, what is the land going to be worth? Even in its raw state, it's worth $30 million easily. But you see, Mr. Speaker, it's easier to be able to convince people that somebody has come down here to rip people off. And the same thing, you know, Mr. Speaker, when this same Cabot was in Nova Scotia, the Nova Scotia Development Company also invested with them. That is their model. So, Mr. Speaker, this is nothing wrong. This is nothing unusual. The government was not involved. The NIC is a separate board. They're the ones who evaluated the investment. And the way it works is they have an investment committee. From the investment committee, it goes to their board. It's only when it makes it through the board, they will come to the Minister of Finance to say, do you approve or you don't approve? But the process and the due diligence is done by them. So, Mr. Speaker, I move on. Impacts. Member from Vieux-Fort South rightfully said, the Prime Minister doesn't appoint the DPP, but the Prime Minister can push to make it happen. The persons who appoint the DPP are the Judicial and Legal Services, and they advise the GG. And that's because the DPP is independent from government, Mr. Speaker. But government pushed, changed the salary base so they can go and get a proper DPP, and made sure it happened as a priority. And the DPP now is in place, Mr. Speaker. So, what happened with impacts, Mr. Speaker? The member from Vieux-Fort South, who was the Prime Minister at the time, Mr. Speaker, came and made this TV presentation, an announcement about this investigation that had taken place. Mr. Speaker, the Jamaicans that made up the impacts report never worked with the DPP. So it means that the DPP now has to go in and validate all of the information. So to take the report and don't even supply any of the evidence, Mr. Speaker, and give it to the DPP's office. That's why the DPP wrote and said, I can't do it. You have not given me the resources to do it. Okay? And I have to collaborate the evidence. So, you see that, Mr. Speaker? They can't go to DPP. So you're going to take the law in your own hand. Member from Castries East. Sir, you must follow the law. You can't write the laws yourself. You can't change them to suit you. The fact is that the DPP is the person who is going to prosecute the case. There has to be an investigator. But the investigators, you cannot take them from outside St. Lucia, have them have no interaction with the DPP, no veracity as to whether the evidence that they've collected is any good. So guess what? The new DPP had to come in. We now needed to have to put money in place to do what? In order for him to go and do. But Mrs. Speaker, they're saying 4 years. What we promised to do was an investigation and we did it. And the investigation said that there was no evidence that was admissible, and that we would have to make the resources available to the DPP in order that he can have an investigative arm to be able to do it. And that's exactly what's taken place. And Mr. Speaker,
Honorable members, continue, Honorable Prime
I have
Minister,
used my...
and take note that you have 15 minutes in which to complete.
15 minutes?
Yes.
Ask for some more time, please.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to invoke for the 210 to allow the Honourable Prime Minister another 50 minutes.
Honorable members, the question is that standing order for the 210 be invoked to allow the Prime Minister an additional 40 minutes in which to complete his presentation. I now put a question. As many as are of that opinion, say aye. Aye. As many as of a contrary opinion, say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, members. We talked about the courthouse and the police station. From day one, we've said 2 buildings on the same location. A simple thing, Mr. Speaker, that when you bring the prisoners to the Court of Justice, the criminal courts, the judges have been complaining continuously about their own safety. So it's being designed so that the same holding station cells at the police headquarters can also be now used for the courts. But it's a separate building, its own separate entrance, its own separate computer systems. And as was indicated by the member from Castries Southeast, there are a multitude of examples around the world of where this is being done. But I want to say that the final design and the proximity of the buildings has to be approved by the judiciary. And those meetings are taking place. And we'll find out. But at the end of the day, we have done the designs. This is nothing unique. We believe that we're going to be able to satisfy the Chief Justice and her team in what we're attempting to do. In terms of SMMEs, again, this idea that all we're doing is trying to get relief off of rent, Mr. Speaker. We've talked about the €5 million that's going into the St. Lucia Development Bank. We've talked about the incentives that we're doing for small businesses. We've spoken about the additional money, I think it was $5,000 to $25,000 being made available through SLDB for small businesses up to 1,200 people. The big thing is to get the economy going, and that's the big challenge, to be able to help all of these individuals. Victimization. You know, the member from Castries Southeast reminded me of the road on what's it called, the East Coast Highway, where the 2 Mikus were left out. And recently, you know, Mr. Speaker, I had a chance of going to Dennery North, and I went to a place called Austin Hill. And it just reminded me of the same thing, because when I went up Austin Hill, half of the hill, part of the hill is concrete, the next part of the road is dirt, the next part of the road is concrete, the next part of the road is dirt, and I'm asking myself, what's going on? And the people there saying, Mr. Prime Minister, you have to ask what's going on. All you have to do is to check whose house in front of where, and you'll know exactly what's going on. Who builds a road like that? Hummingbird Beach. Project had already started. Members on the other side talk about, victimization, project's not finished, etc. The project stayed there, not one block moved. Who do you think you were hurting? United Workers' Party? That's who you think you were hurting? That the persons were going to the beach, there was no bathrooms for them to go to the beach? Old dirty water that not even the rep at the time, what's his name, Dalsu, used to be able to go to. He said it publicly, he wouldn't bathe there. So all I'm saying to you, Mr. Speaker, do not even begin to talk to this government about victimization. Okay? They are the leaders. They're in a league by themselves, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, corruption. You know, Mr. Speaker, the member from Castries East, who is now the leader of the opposition and political leader of his party, has on several occasions made statements that corruption and good governance is going to be one of the pillars and mainstays of his administration. And I applaud him for that. Those are good virtues. But I'd like to say to him that when my government came in, the first thing that we did is we amended the Crown Act. But you see, I don't expect them to remember that, Mr. Speaker, because they had already walked out. And that had become a common practice with them. Right? Whenever they don't like it, the way that things are going, they walked out. But the day that they walked out, we passed that. What was the importance of that? Was we changed it so there could be no statute of limitations on any form of corruption by government officials. From that day on, it wasn't made retroactively. From that day on. And so we were holding ourselves accountable at the highest level and putting us on line that if we got caught or anybody got caught, there could be no statute of limitations, bar of statute of limitations on that. But you know, Mr. Speaker, I want to give my friend and my colleagues some advice. If in fact that this is what he wants people to believe in, then he needs to start in his own party. That's where he needs to start. So the fact is that he's taken over as a leader. Some of the issues the party has hanging over it don't go away. So the former political leader of your party refused to answer about Grindberg. At no occasion has he given a public explanation about Grindberg. That is your burden. And particularly now, Mr. Leader, if you're going to run him into Fort South, he's going to be one of your candidates. Can you explain how is it that he came to sign an agreement in which we are still in court over our seabed and the rights to oil exploration? How is it? How is it that a license was given and it didn't go through the Governor General? And I think it's grossly disrespectful, Mr. Speaker, for politicians who are in a position of authority not to offer an explanation to the public. But that now becomes his burden. He must internally ask that. Mr. Speaker, Rochamel, Mr. Speaker, that becomes his burden. Why was the agreement signed? Why was the guarantee given? Why were all the things that happened? And this idea where you say, well, we lost $30 million, but we got a hotel. Well, it was going to be a hotel nonetheless. That doesn't satisfy or justify what took place. Again, there was an investigation, there was an inquest, an inquiry. And the member who was the Minister of Finance at the time, still a member of your party, you are now the leader, didn't even want to testify, has never offered an explanation as to what took place. I see his good friend, Mr. Paris, has been arrested in Barbados. Very interesting to see what's going to happen with that case. Speaker, we have Jufali. So you have a situation where the British courts have indicated, Mr. Speaker, and this is to you, the leader, that the British courts have indicated that clearly diplomacy was sold. Now that's fine. Diplomacy was sold, Mr. Speaker. But who benefited? Did the state benefit? Because if you listen to the members on the opposite side, they have a conscience. They want to make sure that it's people-centric. So if you did this thing with this billionaire, and you can show, and I have to imagine, Mr. Speaker, if there was evidence in which the public and the little man benefited, that they would be on top of the mountain screaming it out. But it's amazing to me, Mr. Speaker, they have not been able to do that. So again, I am saying to the member on the other side that who was Jafali? How did he get the passport? Who benefited? Did anybody financially benefit, Mr. Speaker? Are there any secret accounts? Is there any money that was transferred? Do you know any of those things? Because these are important questions, Mr. Speaker, that when you're going to have your party to do it. Then, Mr. Speaker, then we have the minister's account. So again, I want to ask the leader the Leader of the Opposition. What investigation has he done? Has he asked the minister what happened? Has he asked, Mr. Speaker? Because now he's taking the responsibility for it. How much money was spent in the minister's account? How was the money approved? How were the projects selected? How much money was done? Mr. Speaker, if in fact were there people who got contracts who actually ran for their government in the last election? These are the questions that I would expect that he would be asking. Now, Mr. Speaker, when I took over as political leader of my party, those are the hard questions I asked all my colleagues. We sat down and had those discussions. And those persons that could not give us satisfactory answers, and those persons who gave us answers that they did not connect the dots, we asked them to leave. And the evidence is there to speak for itself. But I want to say that if in fact he's going to take that up as a mantle and is going to be a cornerstone of his government, then he needs to start now. And are we to assume that by the fact that he has not said anything, that he's done his investigation and he's satisfied? So, Mr. Speaker, it leaves now the last one, because my good friend from Castries South opened up an issue. And I listened to him very carefully as to where he was going, Mr. Speaker. And I just have to ask some basic questions. He said that the car belongs to him and that there's a witch hunt. So if that is the case, Mr. Speaker, is it true that the car has not been cleared as yet? That the car is still on a pre-delivery? And let me explain a pre-delivery, Mr. Speaker. A pre-delivery is not something that's legal that customs can do. A pre-delivery is a discretion that the controller of customs can offer. So is it true that the car is still on a pre-delivery? If it's still on a pre-delivery, why has he not been able to cure his entry? Next thing I want to ask, Mr. Speaker, is it true that the car that he has is the same car that the state has evidence to show that it was registered in the state's name in the UK? Simple question. The car that he has, is it the same car that is in the UK? Then, Mr. Speaker, I want to know, did the car that he has benefit from a VAT exemption in the UK? And, Mr. Speaker, I also want to say that who, in fact, bought the car? So when the invoice is in whose name, the registration of the vehicle is in whose name, etc. So my understanding, Mr. Speaker, that there's an investigation taking place. I stay out of the investigation because I want to make sure that this is being done by the professionals and being done by the government professionals themselves. So, Mr. Speaker, certainly as the Minister of Finance, when it was brought to my attention these kinds of questions, I sent them to the appropriate authorities to answer those questions. And the member said the same thing. The member said the same thing, that there's a letter from the Director of Finance to the Controller of Customs. It's for that matter to be resolved. Nothing else. So these are questions that I would certainly suggest that the Leader of the Opposition himself
Mr. Speaker,
ask the
point of
member
order.
from
Mr.
Castries
Speaker.
South.
And a
So,
point of
Mr.
order.
Speaker,
The honourable member has asked me, a member of parliament who's sitting right here, a number of questions. And I don't know whether he wants me to answer them or you're not going to allow me to answer them? No?
I was directing
No,
the
Your Honor.
questions. I was helping my good colleague from Castries.
Oh,
is
you're
Mr.
afraid me
Speaker.
answer them?
I was helping my good colleague from Castries. You can answer them outside. No, go and answer them outside. No problem. No problem. So, Mr. Speaker, when the member wants to come to this House and when he wants to go on the platform and continue to talk about good governance and corruption, it has to start at home. That's when it has credibility. That's my advice to him, Mr. Speaker. And there are more questions than there are answers. So, Mr. Speaker, let me say this to you. I want to get to the substance of the debate. And it was amazing. Very little time was being spent by the members on the other side to actually debate the bill. Very little. In fact, I have to say to you, Mr. Speaker, that it was almost embarrassing, and I can say that the leader of the opposition's rebuttal was vacuous. For those persons who don't know what vacuous means, empty. For him to stand there and to take the IMF money and say how he would spend the IMF money tells me how little he understands about the finances. And I only hope that if he does in fact win, that there's going to be somebody else who's going to be the Minister of Finance. Because honestly, Lord help St. Lucia if he's the Minister of Finance. We have come to the House, Mr. Speaker, and we've indicated the following: that there's going to be a contraction in the economy. The initial contraction was estimated to be at 10%. Since then, the ECCB, World Bank, and the IMF have indicated globally the contraction is going to be greater, and as a consequence, they believe that the contraction in St. Lucia and in the Eastern Caribbean is going to be greater. The revenue had been brought down from $1.1 billion in tax revenue to $925 million. We indicated very clearly that we do not believe that we're going to get to $925 million. And so therefore, we're going to have to borrow additional funds. We also clearly indicated, Mr. Speaker, that we have $700 million in bonds and treasury bills rolling over. And what we're seeing is a redemption rate of 25%, meaning that 25% of those bond and treasury holders are wanting their money back. And therefore, there's a cash burden on the state to meet that requirement. So we believe that we're talking about close to $900 million, $850 million that we're going to need. We also admitted, Mr. Speaker, that to be able to go out there and depend on the regional bond market to fill that gap would be virtually impossible. And what have we done? Because of the good governance of this country, because of the confidence that the IFIs have in this government, that we were able to go out now and borrow $35 million. We're waiting for the finalization of it from CDB on a policy-based loan, 35 million US. We were able to go out and borrow $30 million from IMF. We're now converting about $40 million with the World Bank. We've gone out and gotten ECCB. Mr. Speaker, members saying whether it's St. Lucia loan. I can't speak for other people. I know that some people have been able to go out and get an IMF loan. They have some people who've gone out and got a CDB loan. Sorry? I did what?
Honourable Member.
Mr. Speaker.
Continue on, Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we went out and we were able to negotiate these funds. What's interesting about these funds, Mr. Speaker, is that it is going to be highly concessional. We're talking about, in some cases, 20 to 40 years to repay, with moratoriums of 5 years, Mr. Speaker. So here's the reality. The burden on us to be able to, on our recurrent revenue, meaning on our consolidated fund, in the initial phases is not going to be overly stressful in having to pay for that debt, unlike if we had to borrow money on bonds or treasury bills and be under pressure for them rolling over all the time. So, Mr. Speaker, what we've been able to achieve is go out and get these monies and to take the uncertainty of how we're going to fund this year's budget. And we've completely funded this year's budget. We are in the process of finalizing some negotiations with some of the credit unions here in St. Lucia. We have other institutions that are coming to the table. And I'm confident, Mr. Speaker, that the government is going to be able to meet the budget requirements, revenue requirements this year without having to depend on the regional bond market, as well as being in a position to make sure that we can fulfill all of our debt obligations this year. We've taken the prognosis that instead of tourism revenue being down by 50%, we believe that tourism revenue is going to be down by 80%, which means that we think that tourism will start coming back around December. We hope it might come back earlier, but we don't know. But we've taken the worst case scenario and planned for it. Now, the reality is the government has put itself in an incredibly good position to be able to deliver on the same social programs. So where did the IMF money go in? It's part of a package to fill a very big hole. This is not incremental money that you're getting that you can decide how you're going to spend. So the member from the other side obviously is very naive about the budget. So, Mr. Speaker, the budget is not that complicated, Mr. Speaker. It's $310 million a year in debt financing, $560 million a year in pension and wage bills, and $400 million in operating cost. So we're talking about, those are the basic things. And all the money that we're going to be getting is to do that. So, Mr. Speaker, I'm confused at the members' naivety. Where? How? So, Mr. Speaker, this budget has taken out the anxiety that we're going to be in a position to be able to help the social programs and the incentives that we've provided, that we can deliver on them. The only difficulty that we've continuously say, Mr. Speaker, is cash flow. Because to able to get money in the first 3 months, Mr. Speaker, we're getting enough money, but we've admitted it. It's going to take until September to get the money from the World Bank. It's going to take until September to get the money from CDB. So, Mr. Speaker, this is why we went and we were negotiating with the unions, Mr. Speaker, in order to get a deferment of salaries to help us in the first 3 months, Mr. Speaker. I have not hidden that. In addition to that, I've said, in the absence of getting that deferment from the workers, where's that money come from? It's come from payables. So our payables has gone skyrocketing. It was in excess of $71 million. And the reality is that that $71 million should be circulating in the economy at this particular time. Sorry?
Proceed, Honorable Prime Minister.
See, Mr. Speaker, you know, Mr. Speaker, when a member keeps on wanting to take one aspect of the economy and believe that that by itself is going to solve the problem, we have all the social programs. We have government loans. We have all kinds of utilities, Mr. Speaker. We have everything that we're supposed to be paying and spending for. But, Mr. Speaker, if in fact at this stage I'm having to explain these basics to the member, I mean, honestly, he should really choose somebody else to be his Minister of Finance. Mr. Speaker, we got monies from IMF, from the CDB, from the Eastern Caribbean Bank, from the World Bank, from the Taiwan, okay, and also overdrafts. We've been able to get and raise about $800 million in order to meet the short gap in revenue, because revenue has gone down. First month it was down to $50 million. We would have normally gotten 110. Barbados, the members on the opposite side said, oh, it's not a compulsory program. It was a compulsory program. The only difference is that the central bank in Barbados was buying the bonds. But the initial part is everybody has to take the bonds. And when they're taking the bonds, they have to, it is true. And it is true. And they're taking 7% a month for 18 months. Some people are taking 12% a month for 18 months. And some people are taking 17% a month for 18 months. So, Mr. Speaker, every single islands up north that are basically saying they don't know how they're going to meet payroll. All around the world. The state of California had a budget surplus of $22 billion. Within 3 months, they went to a deficit of $54 billion. A $70 billion turnaround in 3 months. And this is where, on one side, the members on the opposite side want to say, oh, we understand COVID and et cetera and everything else, and we're not holding you responsible for COVID. But on the other hand, okay, not dealing with what the reality is. There is a significant cash shortfall. Do you have to be a genius, Mr. Speaker, at this point to believe that the economy is going to contract this year? Do you have to be a genius, Mr. Speaker, to believe that it's probably going to be the largest contraction in the history of St. Lucia? You don't need to be a genius. Of course, I'm telling you now that is going to be the case. But when people want to start playing politics at this stage with something like that, it begs the question, do you really care? And you know, that brings me into the last part of my presentation, Mr. Speaker. And you know, the member from Vieux Fort South said that a lady had written to him to ask him, why are we building a new St. Lucia? Amazing. Very simple question. Why are we building a new St. Lucia? You were in government for 15 years. You took the debt to GDP. When you came in 1997, the debt to GDP was 37%. When you left office in 2006, it was 67%. Glorious times. Couldn't grow the economy. Mr. Speaker, when we came into office, schools, when you ask, Mr. Speaker, why you want to build a new St. Lucia, just physically go and look at the schools in 2016 and ask yourself whether in fact that was okay, that you can send your kids to school. The bathrooms, I mean, I went to see your school in Babonneau. It was embarrassing. The bathrooms, the electricals, the windows. So here you are telling kids about excellence and being competitive on a global basis, and they're living in a place that looked like a third world or worse. Our health care. Which was the healthcare facility you could have gone around in 2016, Mr. Speaker, and said this was world class? This is the best it can be. You couldn't get medicine. In my own constituency in Deriso, 2 nurses there, if one left, the other one left because of thieves. Every day it was being broken into. Same story all around the island. None of those services were there. You went up to the Victoria Hospital. Does that scream at you world class? Everything is good, everything is great. The security of the country. Is it world class? Can we call up the police anytime and the car comes down? You talked about the ambulance not being able to come. Are we happy with those levels of services? Are we satisfied? Do we believe that people are doing the best? Do you think that St. Lucia is the best it can be, Mr. Speaker? Is that what we thought? Infrastructure. Did we have the best roads? They have people in Cassenba when I went to Minister's new road. There was a lady all the way down at the end. Came out crying. Why? 28 years she'd lived there. She thought that she would never see that kind of road. So the road that she had before, Minister, was she happy? Was that world class? Did that inspire her? Mr. Speaker, sports, young boys going, no lights, inconsistent, no equipment, no programs. But yet we would, as leaders, keep talking about how important these things are.
Honorable members.
Mr. Speaker,
allow the Prime Minister to be heard. Honorable member, please allow the Prime Minister to be heard.
Social services, Mr. Speaker, 13 social workers. You go and see, they don't even have cars to drive around. Was that world class? Are we satisfied that when we go up to Bordelais, we see how many young people come from broken families? Do you have to do a study? Do you have to do a study, Mr. Speaker, to figure out what the problem is? Do you? Mr. Speaker, economic opportunity. How could I be as a young person, unemployment rate was 40, 41 or 44%. Unemployment rate was 24%. Where was the inspiration? Where was the broadband width? Where was the support to say, I see world-class business people around me who can inspire me? Mr. Speaker, it is for that reason Labour Party offered better days. Did they offer better days because the days that they had before were good? Or they were satisfied? Better days. And this is why there's an interview with me before we came into government that I said that the system is so broken, that the country is so broke, that we're not coming in to tinker with anything. You can't solve the police problem without fixing and creating a world-class police headquarters. We can't put a building to have a hospital without putting the operating systems in place and making sure that it's well funded so we can deliver consistent services and that the nurses aren't running away. We have to have a government that's sensitive to the fact that people are all around the island, can't all be coming to Castries to get the services, and that the technology of e-government is there. Those are the things that we're committed to, Mr. Speaker. That's what this budget is talking about. And what I am the most proud about of all my colleagues here today that made presentations Nobody lamented the fact that there's COVID. COVID becomes something that we must overcome, but our commitment to the development of this country remains a priority. That's what it is. And it's a people-centric, and regardless of how many times you want to say that I'm insensitive to those people, I am not. My government is not. Every day my government proves that. Just go down to the Castries market and see world-class what it looks like. Fix up the bathrooms for them. Didn't charge them 1 cent extra in rent. We're now going to finish off the Castries market to where? Make an opportunity for our younger people to have their own shops. When you go around and you see how creative they are, but they're all struggling to find a market. That's why I said we're going to make the Castries market the #1 attraction in St. Lucia. That's people-centric. That's people-centric. Village tourism, to diversify the wealth, create opportunities in people's homes. Mr. Speaker, members on the other side, pretend. You must focus on the family. What is the greatest destruction of the family in this island? Is the imbalance of growth. Young people from my constituency who have to go an hour and a half to 2 hours a day to commute to be able to get a job up here. That's the problem. That's what's going on, Mr. Speaker, in this country. So for anybody to tell me they're going to have to question why we have to build a new St. Lucia, really? People were so satisfied? But no, you want to translate that it's talking about making it into New York City. Not about making it to New York City. It's about making it ours and making sure the services are there. Making sure it's our culture and our heritage. That is what we're going to be focused on, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, see, Mr. Speaker, you're going to island with Mr. Speaker, at the end of the day, Mr. Speaker, I want to ask the question. Where was the empathy? When you identified the idea of poverty, or you identified the idea, we knew the problem of unemployment, we knew that there was a lack of hope. What was the solution? We've offered solutions, Mr. Speaker. And sadly, the members on the other side can only focus on petty politics, about one-upmanship, about putting themselves first and making it out like the St. Lucia can't survive without them. Well, I have to say to you that you need to wake up, Mr. Speaker. They need to wake up. Because the evidence there suggests they cannot and have not managed the economy. They don't have any ambition for this country. They do not want to see this country aspire. They want to keep the country so that they're in charge. And I can say to you that this is the party of empowerment. That is what we stand for. And we are going to be focused on building a new solution. And if you don't get your governance right, then I can repeat what the member from Castries South said. Tick tock, tick tock. Thank you.
Tick tock, tick tock, tick tock.
Honorable members, the question is that the Appropriation Bill 2020-2021 be read a second time. I now put the question. As many as are of that opinion, say aye. Aye. As many as are of a contrary opinion, say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it.
An act to provide for the services of the State of St. Lucia for the year ending on the 31st day of March 2021.
Honorable members, let us review the bill. Clause 2.
Appropriation of $1,697,000,000 $312,800 for the services of the State of St. Lucia for the year 2020-2021.
Honorable members, Clause 2 stands part of the bill. Schedule.
Section 2.
Schedule stands part of the bill. Clause 1.
Short title.
Clause 1 stands part of the bill. Honorable members, the question is that the committee rises and the bill be reported. I now put a question. As many as are of that opinion, say aye. As many as of a contrary opinion, say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Honorable members, I beg to report that the Appropriation 2020-2021 bill went through committee stage with no amendments. Honorable Member for Meerkat South and Prime Minister.
Speaker, I beg that the bill read a third time and passed. Mr. Speaker, that the bill be adopted and read a third time and passed.
Honorable members, the question is that the report of the committee be adopted and that the Appropriation 2020-2021 bill be read a third time and passed. I now put a question. As many as are of that opinion, say aye. Aye. As many as are of a contrary opinion, say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it.
Be it enacted by the Queen's Most Excellent Majesty, by and with the advice and consent of the House of Assembly and the Senate of St. Lucia, and by the authority of the same as follows. This act may be cited as the Appropriation Act 2020-2021.
Motions, Mr. Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move the following motion standing in my name. Whereas it is provided by Section 3 of the National Savings and Development Bonds Act, Cap 1525, that under the authority of the resolution of Parliament, the Minister responsible for finance may raise by the issue of savings bonds inside and outside of St. Lucia money up to the amount of $2.4 billion for financing such capital or other expenditure, and for such debt refinancing as he or she determines. And whereas it is further provided under Section 4 of the National Savings Development Bonds Act that the bond shall be issued in such form and on such terms and conditions as the Minister responsible for finance directs. And whereas the Minister of Finance considers it necessary to raise on the regional government securities market through the private placement of, at a maximum rate of 7.5%, the amount of EC 186 for financing the 2021 budget, and the amount of $434 million for refinancing existing debts. Be it resolved that the Parliament authorizes the Minister for Finance to raise on the regional government securities market through private placement at a maximum rate of 7.5%, the amount of EC 186 million for the financing of the 2021 budget, and the amount of EC 434 million for refinancing existing debts. Mr. Speaker, this is a standard motion that follows the Appropriations Bill, which deals with the approval for the financing of the Appropriations Bill.
Honorable members, the question is that Parliament authorizes the Minister for Finance to raise on the regional securities market or for private placement at a maximum rate of 7.5%. A, the amount of EC 186 million for financing the 2020-21 budget, and B, the amount of EC 444 million for refinancing existing debts. Honorable Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, let me assure our members that I will not be very long. But considering the fact the Prime Minister sought to call me all kind of names, vacuous, and having no idea as to what's happening, and praying that St. Lucia would be spared a calamity, I just want to make a few points, Mr. Speaker, because this name calling, and that happens in this Parliament all the time, imputing that people hate St. Lucia and imputing there's only knowledge on one side. I just want to say a few things, make a few points, because the tire now has begun to hit the road, and all the nice talk and thing, we have to deal with some realities, Mr. Speaker. Some realities of the present economic situation that the country is in. And just before I do that, Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister and his people say all the time, you've been in government for 15 years, 15 years. I just want to make a point. The United Workers' Party in modern governance has been in power for 39 years, and it's the New Labour Party in power for 15 years. That's a fact of history. So when we are recalling the history books, we must say the facts straight, especially when you say it in this Parliament, when it's going to be a record for everyone to see. The United Workers' Party, from 1964, have been in power for 39 years, and it's the New Labour Party in power for 15 years. So it is very unfair to just say the 15 years and forget the 39 years. That's just a point of fact. As to what happened in these years, I'm not discussing that now because I know members want to go. But the fact is, the United Workers' Party has governed this country for 39 years, and the St. Lucia Party for 15 years. That's a fact of history. Mr. Speaker, the point I'm making is that you all always shout about 15 years, 15 years, 15 years, and forget that you're in power for 39 years. And after these 39 years, times were completely different, particularly before 1997, in the banana days when St. Lucia would have got, I went to school on a banana scholarship, because my father used to have a few bananas in our yard.
So Speaker, the point of order, please.
He went to sell it, and I went to school. That's what made the point.
Mr. Speaker, I'm just seeking your guidance, which is why I raised a point of order, and I don't want to interrupt but as a member who's learning in the House, I just wanted to find out under 45.3 whether the member could have raised the issue of the 15 years, considering it was from a previous bill in a current session. So I'm just asking, it's one of the ways we learn as we go along. Thank you.
I am taking that the member will tie his statement to the current. Continue, Honourable Member. Honourable Member, are you through?
No. Sorry, Mrs. Mapolis. You okay, my friend? It actually is 17 years. 79 into us 2 more. So I give you some more. We're in power for 18 years, and you're in power for 39 years. I know that. Now, Mr. Speaker, the tire has hit the ground. Now, let's look at the borrowing now, Mr. Speaker. Now, in the budget, the budget statement says that there is a financing gap of $560 million net of refunds. That's paid 71. After that, he says he'll finance it by government debt instruments, including bonds and treasury bills, of $267 million, and external borrowing of $292 million. That will make up the $560 million. The motion in front of us says that he's borrowing $186 million for financing the 2021 budget and $434 million for refinancing of existing debts. If you go into the social and economic, into the estimates of expenditure, you'll find that he needs to pay for his debt service, Mr. Speaker. He needs $310 million. for his debt service, he needs $306 million. So from this $306 million, he intends to finance it from the $434 million that he's got to refinance. Follow me, Mr. Speaker? All right. So that means that he still has, in the $306 million that he has to spend, from the $434 million, he still has a shortfall to finance the current budget. Because he only has $186 million from the bonds, if he sells all, and he has a difference between 434 and 306. So what that means, Mr. Speaker, is even after he does that, he still has a major financing deficit, a gap. Because even though when he raises that money, he still has a financing gap, Mr. Speaker. A financing gap of $246 million, which he has not found, he hasn't said where he'll get money from. Right now, further, Mr. Speaker, what we already have now is at local revenue and taxes, he has a financial.
Continue, honorable member.
Now, I want to be local revenue and taxes. He's already accounted for all his local revenue and taxes. My head sharp at him. He is already accounted for all his local revenue up there. 101.19 billion. Total revenue tax 924. So he's already accounted for all of it there. He still has the deficit there. Now, Mr. Speaker, that is adding to his debt. When I say his debt, I'm sorry. I don't mean his debt, the country's debt. Of $3.4 billion, according to the Social and Economic Review, Mr. Speaker. So, even before, and that is the position the country is in when we talk about debt, even before the Minister of Finance can finance this budget, the debt of the country will be $3.7 billion. Let me tell you how I worked that out. He started with $3.4 billion. He's taken $1.886 million from bonds. That gives $3.6 billion. He is looking for $434 million to refinance his debt. And then he has debt service of $306 million. So there's $3.7 billion worth of debt. Even before he's completed, he's got the remainder, his financing debt of $246 million. So at the end of this financial year, if all these things are equal, St. Lucia's debt will be $4 billion. And that is just saying all things being equal, our debt is going to be $4 billion. Now, the reason why I'm saying that, Mr. Speaker, is because we talk about St. Lucia meeting his 59% debt, and we make all these statements, Mr. Speaker, which really sound good. But what I'm saying is that this situation is we are in a serious state of financial problems, Mr. Speaker. And that is why what we are saying to the government is be cautious, because I was just reading an article, Mr. Speaker, that says the end of tourism. We have to be very cautious, Mr. Speaker, when we are making these statements and raising people's expectations, because the reality of the situation, Mr. Speaker, is that St. Lucia's debt is going to be unsustainable, and we still are going to have the problems that the Prime Minister wants to avoid. This, we have to come back here, if all things being equal, to borrow another $250 million. if he has to meet all the requirements of that budget. And what has caused our debt-to-GDP ratio to look better on paper is the rebasing, which is on page 28 of the Social and Economic Review. And that rebasing has taken place. I want to read it, Mr. Speaker. According to the GDP tables, which are presented in this Economic and Social Review, now reflect constant price GDP, page 28. Constant price GDP estimates that are based on the economic market prices that prevailed in the year 2018, the new base year. You know who was in power in 2018? The previous constant price GDP series was based on the year 2006. Reference a structure of the supply and demand of products in the domestic economy that was over 12 years old. Therefore, it became critical that the GDP series be rebased to be more consistent with prevailing market prices. The process of rebasing the GDP series commenced 3 years ago with the updating of supply and use tables that provide a very detailed framework of how all categories of goods are supplied, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, the talk that because we manage the economy so well that our debt-to-GDP ratio has increased doesn't bear fruit in the figures. The reason why the debt-to-GDP ratio is decreased because of the rebasing. These are just facts, Mr. Speaker. So before I end, I just want to caution that if all goes well, and remember, some time ago, the member Kashisov was criticized because he said something that was true. If all goes well, if we pay the entire $206 million of our debt servicing this year, our national debt will be $4 billion at the end of this financial year. And that is clear according to the figures. And we have not even taken the contingent liabilities yet. And then I don't want to go and discuss the airport again because I think we've exhausted that. We'll never agree, and the Prime Minister says what is. But the point is, Mr. Speaker, that we are in a precarious situation with debts. And that is something that we cannot boast about debt-to-GDP ratio, even the best within the world, and by his own figures. And I have given him the privilege of servicing his debt 100% this year. The national debt is going to be $3.7 billion, plus the $246 million that he has to collect to finance his budget. And we say that he'll finance everything there. So we have a $4 billion national debt at the end of this financial year. I just want to make it clear because we have this discussion about debt and development and the economy. I'm not even blaming him for that now. I'm not doing it now. I'm just stating the facts. At some time, yes. But for now, right now, although the Prime Minister says I know nothing about the subject, I would never say that about him. But it's the habit here of denigrating people and call them all kind of names. Ask them for legacy and their kind of names. But I'm not going to do that now. It's Friday night. I'm not an Adventist. And I don't want to keep the members say I'm not going to get involved in that. All I'm saying is we're going to have a $4 billion national debt by the end of next year. By the end of 2020. That's all I'm saying, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
Honorable Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm left more confused than I was before because I thought that that's exactly what we've been saying all along. We said that the combination of the shortage in income, which has been caused by COVID, and in particular the shutdown of the global economies and our local economies, that we've seen a significant contraction in revenue. I have repeatedly said in this House, the worst kind of borrowing that a government can do is to borrow money to make up for income shortfall. Because you're borrowing money and you're not getting anything in return for it. This is why normally you have to go through a structural adjustment program. So if you continuously have a situation in which you're running a deficit government, that you're going to get in trouble. And that's exactly what happened to the former government between the years of 2012 and 2014. That's exactly what happened when they ran high deficits. But we're going to be doing, and we're saying we're doing the same thing right now. Mr. Speaker, the member from the other side made a statement. If you go to table 35, table 35, doesn't have a page number, it's table 35, the social economic review. And if you look at the balances, and you look at the overall balance, and you go to years 2011, 2012, it was 5.3%. The years 2012, 2013, it went to 7.5%. And then it went down to 4.8%. Those 3 years is what stifled the government. Now, those 3 years, you can see it there. So when the members on the other side talked about when you came into government, that you inherited a 10% overall deficit. Where is it? The overall deficits are there. When you came in at the end of 2011, 2012, the overall deficit was minus 5.3%. The next year it went 7.5, then 4.8. Okay? So, Mr. Speaker, the fact is that the reality is, and we've said it, that you're going to have, we were projecting before COVID, an overall deficit of 3.5%, Mr. Speaker. But given now with COVID, that number went to 8.5%. That's what we're presenting. And the likelihood, Mr. Speaker, is it might go higher. And that's why I said the member from Beaufort South was the only person that got it. When he said, wait a second, $925 million in tax revenue seems overly optimistic. And furthermore, he said that you have your bonds. And we said, yes, that's why we were going out and negotiating with the unions, for that exact same reason. And when everybody wants to come in here and the member wants to talk about putting all these things to spend another 30-something million US dollars in things to help people, which we would love to do, but every time that we're doing that, that's adding into the deficit. But that's where the government is being pulled. The government doesn't have revenue coming in of its own. It's already had a higher expenditure because of COVID and because we're moving into OKEU this year. And now added on top of that is all of the additional subsidies that people are asking for. They're looking for tax concessions. And that's what this government has to dig itself out of. So if the member from the opposite side is only figuring out now the crisis we're facing, well, I'm glad he's there. And we can have this discussion. The country is in crisis. But the fact is we've been able to stem that crisis only partially. Because while we have now funded the government's budget, he's 100% right. There are small businesses out there that are suffering. There's little people out there that are suffering. And those small businesses and little people, for the most part, are depending on the little subsistence allowance the government can put out. But the real benefit is going to be reigniting this country. But we cannot get this country going back to its normal level until we can open the door with tourism. Because there's nothing else to replace the tourism. But in the absence of that, the capital projects that they have been saying we should not be doing are the only things that we have. And we're saying, okay, they were funded. And most of the loans have a moratorium. So let's get those projects off the ground to be able to put some money in people's pockets. Because that's what we have available to us. And that's what makes the difficulty of opening up this market painful, stressful. Because on one hand, I want to open up the hotels. I want to see the workers go back. I want to see planes starting to fly again. But on the other hand, when you go around the country and you see people going to the beach, you see people going to church, you see them going to visit their homes, and even if there isn't enough money going around, there's some money going around. If you open up too fast and too quickly, and you have a resurgence of what's taking place of like in America, and we have to shut down again, more trouble. Because now not only are we going to have people not working, but we're going to have additional expenses. That's what's going on, Mr. Speaker. So the thing on this bill, Mr. Speaker, is very simple. We're asking to borrow, permission to borrow money for the regional bond market, nothing else. This is not the total amount of money the government is borrowing. This is how much money we're borrowing from the regional bond market. We've given you two amounts. One is to replace existing and to roll over existing debt, and the other one is additional debt of $186 million. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable members, the question is, the Parliament authorized the Minister for Finance to raise on the regional government securities market or through private placement at a maximum rate of 7.5% A, the amount of EC 186 million for financing the 2020-21 budget, B, the amount of EC 444 million for refinancing existing debts. I now put the question. As many as are of that opinion, say aye. As many as of a contrary opinion, say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move the following motion standing in my name. Whereas it is provided under Section 39(1) of the Finance Administration Act, Cap 1501, that the Minister of Finance may, by resolution of Parliament, borrow money from the bank or other financial institution for the capital expenditure of government. And whereas it is further provided under Section 42(1) of the Finance Administration Act, Cap 1501, that they shall be charged on and paid out of the consolidated fund debt charges for which the government is liable. And whereas Parliament, by the Finance Administration Act resolution of Parliament, to authorize the Minister of Finance to guarantee borrowing from the International Development Association to finance the Caribbean Regional Communications Infrastructure Program, authorized by the Minister of Finance to guarantee a loan in the amount of US $4.1 million from the International Development Association for the purpose of financing the Caribbean Regional Communications Infrastructure Program, paid a maximum commitment charge rate payable on the underdrawn financing balance of 1/2% per annum, pay a service charge to the withdrawn credit balance that is equal to the greater of 1, the sum of the 3/4 of 1% per annum plus the basis adjustment to the service charge, 2, 3/4 of 1% per annum, paid a loan in 20 years from the date of the first disbursement of the loan, repay the principal amount of the loan for each 15th day of February, 15th day of August of each year at the rate of 1% commencing on the 15th day of August 2030 to include the 15th day of February 2040. 2% commencing on the 15th day of August 2040 to and including the 15th day of February 2060. And whereas the borrowing approved by the Parliament in Statutory Instrument Number 85/2020 is not a guarantee, and as such the Statutory Instrument Number 85/20 must be revoked. And whereas the Minister of Finance considers it necessary to borrow $4.1 million from the International Development Association for capital expenditure for the Capital Regional Communications Infrastructure Program, and whereas the maximum commitment charge rate payable on the underdrawn financing balance is 1/2% per annum, and whereas a service charge is payable on the withdrawn credit balance that is equal to the greater of the sum of 3/4 of 1% per annum, plus the basis adjustment to the service charge, and 3/4 of 1% per annum. And whereas the loan is repayable in 40 years from the date of the first disbursement of the loan, inclusive of the 10-year grace period. And whereas the principal amount of the loan is repayable on each 15th day of the 15th of February 15th day of August for each year, commensurate with 1% of the loan amount commencing on the 15th day of August 2030 to including the 15th day of February 2040. 2% of the loan amount commencing on the 15th day of August 2040 to including the 15th day of February 2060. Be it resolved that the Parliament revokes the Finance Administration Act, resolution of Parliament to authorize the Minister of Finance to guarantee borrowing from the International Development Association to finance the Caribbean Regional Communications Infrastructure Program, published at the statutory instrument. Be it further resolved that Parliament authorizes the Minister of Finance to borrow $4.1 million from the International Development Guarantee for the capital expenditure of the Caribbean Regional Communications Infrastructure Program. Be it further resolved that the maximum commitment charge rate payable on the unwithdrawn financing balance is 1/2 of 1% per annum. A service charge is payable on the withdrawn credit balance that is equal to the greater of the sum of 3/4 of 1% per annum plus the basis adjustments to the service charge and 3/4 of 1% per annum. The loan is repayable in 40 years from the date of the first disbursement of the loan, inclusive of the 10-year grace period. The principal amount of the loan is repayable on each 15th day of February and 15th day of August of each year, commensurate with 1% of the loan amount commencing on the 15th day of August 2030 to and including the 15th day of February 2040. 2% of the loan amount commencing on the 15th day of August 2040 to including the 15th day of February 2060. So we've debated this bill in the House previously, Mr. Speaker, and as the motion is asked that we revoke the bill because it was passed as a guarantee, and it should have been passed, and the wording should have been a borrowing instead of guarantee. And so I represent this bill for Parliament's approval.
Honourable members, the question is that Parliament revokes the Finance Administrative Act resolution of Parliament to authorize the Minister of Finance to guarantee borrowing from the International Development Association to finance the Caribbean Regional Communications Infrastructure Program, published as Statutory Instrument Number 85 of 2020. Be it further resolved that Parliament authorize the Minister of Finance to borrow US $4,100,000 from the International Development Association for capital expenditure from the for the Caribbean Regional Communications Infrastructure Program. And be it further resolved that A, the maximum commitment charge rate payable on the unwithdrawn financing balance is 1/2 of 1% per annum. B, a service charge is payable on the withdrawn credit balance that is equal to the greater of 1, the sum of 3/4 of 1% per annum plus the basis adjustment to the service charge, and 2, 3/4 of 1% per annum. C, the loan is repayable in 40 years from the date of first disbursement of the loan, inclusive of a 10-year grace period. D, the principal amount of the loan is repayable on each 15th day of February and 15th day of August of each year, commensurate with 1% of the loan amount commencing on the 15th day of August 2020 and including the 15th day of February 2040, 2% of the loan amount commencing on the 15th day of August 2040 to and including the 15th day of February 2060. I now put a question. As many as are of that opinion, say aye. As many as of contrary opinion, say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Mr. Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move the following motion standing in my name. Be it resolved that the Finance Administration Act resolution of the Parliament to borrow for capital expenditure Human Capital Resilience Project, which was previously passed in the House of Assembly on the June 2nd, 2020, be yeah, that's what this revokes it first.
This one first,
Okay.
because you have to put the question first.
Okay. Mr. Speaker, I beg to leave the Honourable House to invoke Standing Order Number 25 and to seek leave of the House to introduce a motion without notice.
Honourable members, I give my consent to this, but the House must also give its consent on the Standing Order 25. So I now put a question. As many as are of that opinion, say aye. As many as of a contrary opinion, say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Leave is granted, Mr. Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move the following motion standing my name. Be it resolved that the Finance Administration Act resolution of Parliament to borrow for capital expenditure Human Capital Resilience Project, which was previously passed in the House of Assembly on June 2nd, 2020, be reintroduced to the House of Assembly. And be it further resolved that the House Assembly revokes the Finance Administration Act resolution of Parliament to borrow for capital expenditure human resource, which was passed on June 20th. So this is the same issue, Mr. Speaker, and that the manner in which it had been previously approved before was not correct, and therefore we have to amend it in terms of borrowing rather than guaranteeing on the bill. All right? Thank you.
Honorable members, the question is that Parliament where am I? Yes. Honorable members, the question is that the Finance Administration Act, Resolution of Parliament to borrow for capital expenditure, Human Capital Resilience Project, which was previously passed in the House of Assembly on June 2nd, 2020, be reintroduced in the House of Assembly. And be it further resolved that the House of Assembly revokes the Finance Administration Act, Resolution of Parliament to borrow for capital expenditure, Human Capital Resilience Project, which was passed on June 2nd, 2020. Honorable Member for Castries South.
Mr. Speaker, just on a matter of procedure, just help me understand what we're doing. Okay, we know we have to revoke what was passed at the last sitting, but this says we are reintroducing a resolution which had an error in it back into the House. Why are we reintroducing the resolution that had an error? The first thing we need to do is revoke what we passed the last time and then introduce it correctly this time. But why we start now by introducing what was previously passed, which was in error? Why are we reintroducing it? But we don't want that one before the House. So we probably should pass a motion without notice to revoke what we had passed and then follow the order paper and then approve this one. I don't know if you follow me, because the previous one had an error, but we passing in the motion, we are saying that what was previously passed in the House is been reintroduced, but it had an error. So why are we bringing back the motion that the resolution had the error? So let's revoke what was done the last time, and then let us approve the corrected version, which is in the order paper. To me, that sounds more logical, no? Because we're bringing back the same resolution, reintroducing the same resolution that had the error.
Honorable. Because the matter has already been passed by the House of Assembly, it is beyond us, meaning it has gone away from us. We need to bring it back in for us to correct it. Now, when we bring it back in, what we're doing, we are technically killing it now. So whatever work we've done, reintroducing it here, that's the only way we could seize of it. We need to bring it back before us. Because the Senate, we have sent it across to the Senate. The Senate has technically, what I would say, rejected. For us to take seize of it, we need to put it back before us, which is what we're doing by reintroducing it here. And then it is the intention to now revoke what we've done. Okay? Because we have on the order paper a separate motion, which is technically the correct motion we should have had before us on the last occasion. So this one is correct. We cannot deal with it by way of that motion because it's already before us. So we need to find another way to deal with what we did on the last occasion. I now put the question. As many as are of that opinion, say aye. As many as of a contrary opinion, say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Mr. Prime Minister.
Speaker, I beg to leave to present the following motion standing in my name. Whereas is provided by Section 39(1) of the Finance Administration Act, Cap 1501, that the Minister of Finance may, by resolution of Parliament, borrow money, that was the change, from a bank or order other financial institution for the capital expenditure of government. And whereas it is further provided under Section 42(1) of the said Act, that there shall be charged on and paid out of the consolidated fund all debt charges for which the government is liable. And whereas the Minister of Finance considers it necessary to borrow an amount of US $20 million from the International Development Association for the purpose of financing the Human Capital Resilience Project, and whereas the maximum commitment charge rate payable on the unwithdrawn finance balance is 0.5% per annum, and whereas the service charge is payable on the withdrawn credit balance that is equal to the greater of the sum of 0.75% per annum plus the basis adjustment to the service charge and 0.75% per annum. And whereas the loan is payable in 40 years from the date of the first disbursement of the loan inclusive of the 10-year grace period, and whereas the principal amount of the loan is repayable on each 15th day of May and 15th day of November of each year, commencement with 1% commencing on the 15th day of May 2030 to and including 15th day of November 2039, and 2% commencing the 15th day of May 2040 and including the 15th day of November 2059. Be resolved that Parliament authorizes the Minister of Finance to borrow an amount of $20 million from the International Development Association for the purpose of financing the Human Capital Resilience Project. Be it further resolved that the maximum commitment charge rate payable on the unwithdrawn financing balance is 0.5% per annum. A service charge is payable on the withdrawn credit balance that is equal to the greater of the sum of 0.75% per annum plus the basis adjustment to the service charge and 0.75% per annum. The loan is repayable in 40 years from the date of the first disbursement of the loan, inclusive of 10-year grace period. The principal amount of the loan is repayable on each 15th day of May and 15th day of November for each year, commensurate with 1% commencing on the 15th day of May 2032 and including the 15th day of November 2039, and 2% commencing on the 15th day of May 2040 to and including the 15th day of November 2059.
Honorable members, the question is that Parliament authorizes the Minister of Finance to borrow an amount of US $20 million from the International Development Association for the purpose of financing the Human Capital Resilience Project. Be it further resolved that A, the maximum commitment charge rate payable on the unwithdrawn financing balance is 0.5% per annum. B, a service charge is payable on the withdrawn credit balance that is equal to the greater of 1, the sum of 0.75% per annum plus the basis adjustment to the service charge, and 2, 0.75% per annum. C, the loan is repayable in 40 years from the date of first disbursement of the loan, inclusive of a 10-year grace period. D, the principal amount of the loan is repayable on each 15th day of May and 15th day of November of each year, commensurate with 1% commencing on the 15th day of May 2030, 2 and including the 15th day of November 2039, and 2% commencing on the 15th day of May 2040, 2 and including the 15th day of November 2059. I now put a question. As many as are of that opinion, say aye. As many as are of a contrary opinion, say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Mr. Prime Minister.
Speaker, before I close, again, I want to thank yourself and all of your staff. It's been 3 long days, but I think 3 productive days. So I want to thank you for your time, your patience, for helping us through the Appropriations Bill. And I want to thank all my other parliamentarian colleagues on a great job for the Appropriations Bill. We have some difficult days ahead. I think we all know that and understand that. So on this point, Mr. Speaker, I move that the House stand adjourned sine die.
Honorable Prime Minister, I know that all members will join you in expressing gratitude to all concerned in ensuring that the debate went ahead as planned, including the staff of the Parliament, the NTN, police, and everyone concerned. Honorable members, the question is that this House do stand adjourned, sign a die. I now put a question. As many as are of that opinion, say aye. As many as of a contrary opinion, say no. We calling for division? I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it.
Thank you so much for staying with the broadcast. We've come to the end of the sitting of Parliament, where the Honorable Prime Minister and Minister for Finance, Economic Growth, Job Creation, External Affairs and the Public Service, Chastney, presented the Appropriation Bill 2020-2021. Contained in the bill, the Prime Minister announced several initiatives to come on stream, including programs to aid and provide relief to small and micro enterprises, such as the provision of the repurposing of US $3.9 million from the Climate Adaptation Fund to provide blended loan and grant assistance ranging from $5,000 to $25,000 to micro and small enterprises, plus several waivers on various taxes. The Prime Minister also highlighted initiatives get towards strengthening the social protection system, and these include reduction in electricity fuel surcharge from $1 to 50 cents for 6 months, and increasing the child disability grant from $200 to $300, and expanding the public assistance cash transfer program from 2,600 to 3,600 households, to name a few. These are geared towards assisting the more vulnerable persons in St. Lucia. A number of motions were presented as well. These include, be it resolved that the Parliament authorizes the Minister for Finance to raise on the regional government securities market a full private placement at a maximum rate of 7.5%, the amount of EC $186 million for financing the 2020-2021 budget, the amount of EC $434 million for refinancing existing debts. Prime Minister noted that this deals with the approval for the financing of the Appropriations Bill. The Prime Minister also tabled a motion, be it resolved that the Parliament revokes the Finance Administrative Act resolution of Parliament to authorize the Minister for Finance to guarantee borrowing from the International Development Association to finance the Caribbean Regional Communications Infrastructure Program, published at Statutory Instrument number 85 of 2020. Be it further resolved that Parliament authorizes the Minister for Finance to borrow US $4,100,000 from the International Development Association for capital expenditure for the Caribbean Regional Communications Infrastructure Program. Be it further resolved that the maximum commitment charge rate payable on the unwithdrawn financing balance is 1/2 of 1% per annum. A service charge is payable on the withdrawn credit balance that is equal to the greater of the sum of 3/4 of 1% per annum plus the basis adjustment to the service charge, and 3/4 of 1% per annum. The loan is repayable in 40 years from the date of first disbursement of the loan, inclusive of a 10-year grace period. The principal amount of the loan is repayable on each 15th day of February and 15th day of August of each year, commensurate with 1% of the loan amount commencing on the 15th day of August 2030 to and including the 15th day of February 2014. 2% of the loan amount commencing on the 15th day of August 2014 and including the 15th day of February 2016. The final motion, be it resolved that the Parliament authorizes the Minister of Finance to borrow an amount of US $20 million from the International Development Association for the purpose of financing the Human Capital Resilience Project. Be it further resolved that the maximum commitment charge rate payable on the unwithdrawn financing balance is 1/2 of 1% per annum. A service charge is payable on the withdrawn credit balance that is equal to the greater of the sum of 3/4 of 1% per annum plus the basis adjustment to the service charge and 3/4 of 1% per annum. The loan is repayable in 40 years from the date of first disbursement of the loan inclusive of a 10-year grace period. The principal amount of the loan is repayable on each 15th day of May and 15th day of November of each year commensurate with 1% commencing on the 15th day of May 2013 and including the 15th day of November 2039 and 2% commencing on the 15th day of May 2014 and including the 15th day of November 2059. Once again, thank you so much for staying with the broadcast. I am Janelle Novel saying good night. Leave me in peace.
I would like to or rather allow. I am going to talk to all of you. We are all here to